Hello everyone, it's Nid here, and I'm sharing with you a new series of episodes through the podcast and the YouTube videos where I will be bringing in a guest. These are people that I find inspiring. They are colleagues, they're friends, they're teachers, and I'm really excited for you to connect with their wisdom and also maybe get to know some areas of self-growth, of opening your heart that are different from what I offer, and also seeing different angles of me when I'm in conversation with someone as opposed to talking to a camera and you at the end. So I really hope that you love meeting Amanda, who is my first guest. We are Jinkies enthusiasts. We enjoy sharing synchronicities, the dreamscape and worlds. And I am sure that you will really love her and what it is that we uncover during this discussion. I do provide a little intro for Amanda, but I just really wanted to touch on the fact that her podcast, Empath Suicide Watch, is a deep dive into what it means to be a sensitive and an intuitive, and how you can unlock your sacred gifts to help your journey through this massive shift in consciousness that we're all currently experiencing as we enter the age of Aquarius. And so if you're someone who's super sensitive, and you probably are if you're following my work, then this is a really beautiful transmission in her podcast that I think you'll really enjoy. And it's also a part of helping you uncover your journey and your power and your gifts. And if you're someone a bit like Amanda, who grew up in a family or a world that didn't really give you a clear messaging around your intuition and your gifts, and you would like to discover more about your own path of awakening, then the more people that you can connect and hear about their stories and their way of accessing their intuition, the easier it's going to be for you to uncover your unique way of moving through that path. Enjoy this episode, and may your next stage of uncovering your amazing gifts and sharing who you are continue to unravel in a gentle and kind way. Much love. Okay, I'm really excited to begin the guest series on the Nids Nitra podcast with a dear colleague and also former client of mine, Amanda Butler, who is a connection to me through the Akashic Records and our love of working with the dream realms and really allowing our intuitive guidance to come through regardless of our training and our experiences, which grounds us but also helps us to stay connected to that bigger picture when we're really present with our clients and with our loved ones as well, and the people that we're here to spend our time with. So I'm really excited to kick off this series with Amanda because she has the most beautiful flow that I know of. It's joyful, it's playful, it's got this childlike energy, and yet it's got this ancient spiritual kind of connection to what she brings through. And so when I was looking at who could I invite to start the podcast, I thought Amanda, because it's comfortable for me as well to host someone that I love her energy and the way in which she speaks and shares from her heart. And so she's going to be bringing through some really potent, juicy transmissions for everyone in this podcast. But I'm going to let her introduce a bit more about herself at this time.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I am really feeling very blessed to be here. I want to start my introduction by orienting myself. So I grew up on the southern tip of Vancouver Island in Lekwungen territory. It's part of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nation in Canada. I introduce myself that way because I am of settler descent, and my father is from here as well. And there's part of me, it's really incredibly magic here where I live. The energy of the land is so incredible. I grew up just steps from the Pacific Ocean, and I've wondered for so long why I was so lucky to incarnate here on this land. And I know it's probably the same in Australia as well, but reconciliation with Indigenous people it's so important and so relevant to what is happening right now on the earth, energetically, spiritually. And I'm 44 years old, and I was called to go back to school, and I'm taking Indigenous studies. So I've been learning this year how to introduce myself and how to talk about the land and how to honor the land and speak of the land. So the exact place that I grew up is called Swengwang Tangu. So in Lekwungen, that means the land that the Swengwang family lived on. And I just love to honor those people and the people I'm meeting in school. And it's been such a spiritual experience being in Indigenous studies. And it's really informing who I am, how I practice as a coach, as a spiritual person, and just how I'm connecting into the earth and connecting out to people. So that's me. I live on the lands of the Lekwungen people, and I am so grateful to be here and to be sharing from the other side of the world with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Amanda. And it is one of those really interesting things moving to Australia, coming from England originally myself, like that reconciliation piece and the importance of acknowledging country and what has been here before. Because what I feel for myself in the learning of making that move is that it reminds us to acknowledge of the people that have cared and passed things down, that kind of lineage, not just of our own ancestry, but of the people who've cared for the land that we receive the benefit of. And then that reconnects us with the importance of what we're passing on to the future. And it moves us out of greed and into that place, right, of moderation, what is necessary, and really thinking about caretaking as opposed to taking, but taking care of in order to think for the future. And so thank you for that.
I think it moves us into the feminine as well, is one of the biggest things, and learning and understanding how colonization worked to actually remove the feminine, which for us who have lineage to England, which is also England, Ireland, and Scotland would be where my ancestry is as well, is that when we think about when that feminine was taken out so long ago, that ramification of the divine feminine, it was just cut out. Whereas here in Canada, that connection to matriarchy and feminine energy of the earth wasn't all that long ago when that was the leadership that was happening on the land. And I think that's what we're shifting back into.
Yeah, so. Totally. And it's as though the earth speaks, right? It's that Mother Earth speaks to us. And when we acknowledge country and we acknowledge land, we're allowing her to speak, and we reconnect, like you say, with that mother energy. And it's just, it shifts everything. As far as I feel that resonance, and I sense when I go back to England, you don't have that, because of the countries that colonized, it's harder to build that connection to land because it's so long ago, and because of all the things that have happened in those countries that led to them going out and colonizing other places. And so it's a different process, I think, for that connection to country and healing that's going to take place in those places in the world than what we can do from these places with this rich and quite recent heritage of knowing that connection to country. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I'll just say that for one of my final projects, I did Indigenous storytelling as my final project. And so I got really into creation myths of the WSÁNEĆ people, which are the other people right here on the tip of the island. And my teacher said to me, because she's a Coast Salish woman, which is all connected, she said, well, what about your myths, Amanda? Like, did you start to look into them? And actually, it did spark it for me. So I started to look into the Grail myth. Right. So those things. And I realized how many deep connections I have to Avalon and that connection. And even through my name, my whole entire name is connected to that myth. And I wouldn't have known that had I not started looking into those stories that were of this land that I'm on right now, where I incarnated.
Beautiful. Yeah. And that reminds me of the Merlin
myths, which connects the other thing that both of us are really passionate about, which is the gene keys.
Right.
And Richard Rudd, who is such a modern day Merlin, as they always say. So it also, that's also for both of us a common heritage where there is that exploration that we both really enjoy, and it helps, I think, open up beyond that country piece, right? It starts again opening our way of contemplating, way of questioning and inquiring in a different energy, in that more feminine energy. But I'm really interested. So obviously you're doing your Indigenous studies at the moment, and your podcast has restarted art, which is like really getting into that art, the flow of time through art. I just love that concept so much. It's beautiful, really, really gorgeous. Like, just, it's what people need. We need to be connecting into time in such a different way, and using it differently. And so it's a really beautiful message through your podcast. So what's really moving through you? Because obviously there's lots of things going on right now.
Yeah. So I would say with my podcast, which is called Empath Suicide Watch. So interestingly, the title is super catchy and kind of out there. It might even rub people the wrong way, but it's meant to be a little bit provocative. And the name came to me really like, it was like one of those sparks of, it just came in. It was like, you have to do something with this idea of Empath Suicide Watch, because I'm a highly sensitive person, and a lot of, being able to feel so much. And when you pick up on things in the world, it's like, what are we even doing? But Empath Suicide Watch is about all those beautiful pieces of divinity that are all around us. And to be able to, when you're sensitive, you can feel them and you can translate them and alchemize them into art. So the podcast for me is a healing journey. Like, it's a physical, emotional, spiritual, mental healing journey that I'm inviting people along with me on. So it's like a story that I'm telling. It's like going on the yellow brick road together. And I know that the people who have heard it so far, they'll be like, whoa, that vibrates for me. And so it's bringing people into that resonance with me. And 4 years ago, I had this meditation where my higher self, I guess, I still am trying to find the language to talk about this. It's like, I'm like, who was it who told me this? But I got the message that it's like, I'm here to gently tune people's frequencies. Like, it was very clear. You're here to gently tune people's frequencies. You will know who those people are. You don't even have to look for them. It's going to be obvious who is going to come in. And it showed me this image of like lines, like when you're in between a channel on a TV and it's going, and he said, this is why there's all these timelines, because everyone's in between channels and people need to tune into the channel. Now, 4 years ago, I was like, what does this mean? I have no idea. And I've started to really figure it out, bringing things in like the gene keys, bringing things in like the dream spell calendar, which is connected to the Tzolk'in. This stuff all came in to my sphere. I'm like, oh, I get it. Now I really get it, because I know that there is a big shift happening, and it's happening a lot faster. And this is what you're talking about with time. Like, time is of the mind, really. So this whole idea that there is this massive shift happening in consciousness where we have evolved and spirit is involving, and some of us are feeling it really, really strong. I'm betting that people who listen to your podcast here are going to watch this are going to really resonate. And so this is the thing about spirit, is that for me, my understanding is that you really can't understand it from a concentrating part in your brain.
Nope.
And so while people are listening to this, they might get tidbits that, oh, what's that? Oh, what's that? Like, I tell people, try not to understand it in a linear way when you hear things like this. It's circular, it's feminine. It's coming down into you in different ways, and it works through that magic of synchronicity. When you'll hear something, it's synchronicity. So I'm seeing the synchronicity in life just open up. And for me, really being pushed to look at my core wounds, to heal. And that's why I say in my podcast, this is a healing journey, both personal and collective. It's my healing journey. But as I heal myself, like, we all heal. When we heal ourselves, we start to ripple that out. And since like a lot of it came in really strong for me in the last couple months, which is why I picked the podcast back up. I made the first episode 2 years ago and then I put it down. I was like, I'm not ready to do anymore. And now I'm like, nope, I'm ready. It's going. Like the healing work happened. I'm like, boom, let's go. I'm ready to tell this story now. So yeah, that's kind of what's coming up for me right now.
It's so exciting when you know that there's something coming through, right? And you begin with it and you're like sitting with it and you're going, how does this make sense? What is this? What do I do with it? Like, you know, and you kind of, it's almost like I often write things down and then I'll have pieces of paper and I'm like flipping it over loads of time, trying to do it in different ways and it's not making any sense. And then, you know, a few years later, like a couple of other things drop through. And I mean, for me, it comes through my light body guide. So, you know, it's like I get shown things, they'll tell me things and it's like, just do this. And it's like, okay, but it makes no sense. Like it seems completely like I was doing one thing and then suddenly I'm like off doing another thing. And then a few years later, it's like, oh, that's what makes sense. That's how it works, right? You know, and things like start coming together, but it's just a puzzle, right? You know, and that's the nature of when we're ready. I feel like, you know, we learn the lesson and it makes sense and it lands. Right. And that's that spiral. It's that spiral of healing. It's like with that bit makes sense. And then we have to go off on another quest and find another piece. And then we go through that little spiral and then that bit lands. And as we go through all the different spirals, then the whole picture starts to come together of like one layer. And then we can drop to the next layer another time later. And in that process, like you express and you share and you communicate. And that's where that, you know, the collective piece really comes in because you're learning your wisdom lands for other people.
Learning your wisdom lens for other people. That's a quotable quote, like 100%. And I'm still at this place, as you can see, where I'm like, what do I say? Do I say my higher self told me? Who is my guide telling me to do this? Who's like, I'm not sure how to articulate that, but I'm just putting it out there.
Say what works for you. Say what works for you, right? Like for a long time, I said higher self.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't too sure. I just felt like it was it felt like it was me. And then for a while, when I did like some Joe Dispenza kind of work, I was like, oh, okay, I'm connecting to my future self. My future self is like coming back, giving me guidance, you know, and I can be the future self doing that to my younger self, you know, so I could go back and do inner child healing with that same relationship of like all of my versions of myself are all present here.
All together.
Because, right?
Like time's not linear.
Because time... Right. So I can collapse time and I can bring all of that into this one place and heal right now and get that advice. And so I found that really helpful for a while. And then over time, as my logical lawyerliness has like learned to accept that I do seem to channel and have a lot of guides, you know, and I've always been told that ever since my brain injury, you know, I was told like, you got some really high level guides, Nid, like they're looking after you, you're good, you don't have to worry about anything. And so I've always had that reassurance, but actually learning to communicate and accept that that's what I'm doing has been, you know, another layer for me of like stepping into something, right? Which is, you know, what you're doing too, right? It's that kind of stepping into it and going, I don't know what I want to call it yet. I don't know what it feels like.
This is what it is right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is it right now? This is what it feels like. And yeah, and it is layers and layers and layers. And one of the things for the layer for me was just bringing it into the Gene Keys perspective is, so I came into the Gene Keys in 2020, which I think a lot of people did because with the pandemic, there was just like this, certain people were drawn in. It was, I think, probably a big intake, I would say.
I'm
That's
sure. Yeah, definitely.
But I did the Venus retreat. I did the activation sequence on my own quite quickly. I just went through it. And then I did the Venus retreat as a retreat with online. And it took, so that was 2020 to 2021. And for those of you who don't know, there's sequences in the Gene Keys, and the Venus retreat is about learning to open your spiritual heart and learning about your wounding patterns through your relationships. And it coincided perfectly with some juicy stuff my partner and I were going through. So it was like so perfect, but it took up until 3 years to really understand my core wound and what I needed to do to integrate the shadow. And once I understood it, it was like, because my core wound is the city of illumination, which Richard Red always says, it's like fireworks. It was like fireworks. There's been fireworks every day since that. I was like, whoa, it really is like fireworks. Like all of a sudden it clicks and everything's like boom, 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 boom. And it's incredible. Like, and I feel like I've shifted into this new energy. I've like the anxiety feeling that I've had my entire life in my body has just, it's dissipated. Like it's just not there anymore.
Yeah.
And I am in surrender and not in resignation. I am in surrender to what is.
And I thank you for saying that, because so many people say they're in acceptance, that they're in surrender, but they're not, they're in resignation. And I just love you to give your take on what's the difference between resignation and now being in surrender.
So with resignation, I feel like it's like you cave in. That's kind of what Richard says. He's like, you cave in. Because I also have the 40th gene key, which is about exhaustion. And he talks about resigning to something where you cave in and you're just like, oh, it's all crap anyways, like whatever. Whereas surrender is that there is a lesson to be learned from whatever path goes. And I don't need to try to make anything happen. That's that divine will of the 40th gene key, the highest level. And if you're resolved and you have energy going forward, it's just like you allow the current of life to bring you up. There's a book by Richard Bach called Illusions, and there's a story at the beginning of it of the river people, and they cling to the bottom of the river. And then this one river person goes, I'm just going to let go and see what happens. And they all go, you're crazy. Why are you doing that? And he floats up and he gets hit a few times. Boom, 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 boom. But finally, he gets to the top of the river and he's flowing. And then every river creature down the river goes, oh, there's the Messiah, right? That's divine will, right? That's divine will. We are in a current, right? We are in a current and we need to let it take us. And I've gone through some very difficult things in my life. And I've realized that, like, you know, they're all there. You have to integrate the difficult. It's all there to be one, not separate.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. And it's that accepting the wholeness, isn't it? The wholeness comes from bringing in all the parts we want to reject. Yeah.
That's the only way.
Right.
And that's the thing, like when you think about separation as being one of the big core wounds, right? When we separate even ourselves, separate the feminine, separate the masculine and feminine, then separate the feminine and the feminine, right? Like everything about separating, that's the ego path is about separating. The wholeness path is integration, right? So
yeah. Oh, beautiful. And so obviously you've been illuminating and letting those fireworks go off.
Glowing from within. Can you see?
You've got a beautiful flow about you, and like the podcast episodes have been having that flow, so it's obviously working, right? You're obviously the Messiah floating down the top of the river right now. So
Messiah, maybe not, but okay, I'll take it.
I would take it totally. Why not? We have to have our moments, right? Of like going, yeah, I can be that. Why not? Because otherwise, how are we ever going to elevate our vibration, right? Most of elevation of vibration comes through being lighter and laughter, you know, joking, making light of things is so important, right? You know, and so if we take it too seriously and we're like, no, only like certain people get to float on water. Like, yeah, you can definitely be floating on water, Amanda.
I love it. And that's funny too, because my evolution sphere in the gene key is ecstasy, right? So it's the shadow of seriousness and the gift of delight. And it's connected with the programming partner, universal love, acceptance, constriction. And boy, let me tell you, constriction and seriousness, when I am not in a good place, I'm heavy. So you have to like remember like that delight, that like, you know, why are we here right now? It's to delight in the body and to experience and to be ecstatic about life.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny because we're overlapping. And one of my questions for you, having known your soul realignment and doing your soul blueprint, and it's so funny because you and I overlap on so many keys already, but with different parts, but so similar. I've got illumination, I've got delight as well. So definitely in there, right? Which is why we're like, yeah, this is fun. But I was so curious as to whether or not you've got 63, which was the inquiry in truth.
So I do not. However, However, my youngest daughter's life's work is the 64, so the programming partner is the 63.
63.
My oldest daughter has the 60. Okay, so this is crazy. My youngest daughter has the 64 in her life's work. I have the 64 in my vocation, and my oldest
Just
daughter
for
has
everyone who's listening, 64 is illumination, which is
illumination.
which is Amanda's core wound, as she was
Yeah.
mentioning earlier on. So she's
Yeah.
got an overlap with both of her children.
Yeah, got an overlap. And the programming partner of the 64 is the 63, which is
truth.
And my older daughter has the 63 truth in her EQ. So I am a mother of some truth tellers.
Yeah.
I've got it. It's there. It's just, it came from my genetics. I have it in my profile, but it came through my genes.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, amazing. Okay, yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to me, because I would expect to see those keys in your profile.
Yeah.
Because it comes through in some way, right? Like, I kind of see the gene keys a little bit like the roadmap of this lifetime, a bit like astrology is. It's like it's showing you how you're operating in this lifetime to move through karma and connect to that state of enlightenment. And so, and I love the way it's broken out into the 3 pathways, because it's helping you break it down in a slightly more relatable way than often astrology. I think we can get a bit lost trying to understand all the houses and where everything fits. Like, I mean, it can take a while to really understand, differences between sextiles and conjunctions and oppositions. And oh my gosh,
it's complicated. It's very complex.
Which is
a simple roadmap. You're right.
Right, exactly. And that's often what we need. And I think that's also why, people love human design, because it's so relatable in daily life, whereas the Gene Keys isn't quite so daily life, right? It doesn't give us such a instruction book kind of manual approach. It opens you up to contemplate and really inquire. And I think it brings in the art. And that's where that feminine piece comes in for me, at least, is it's encouraging us to be artists of our lives, which I sense is why it resonates with you too, because you're such a natural artist. And so what has the Gene Keys been doing for you lately?
Yeah, okay. So many things from what you just said. You just made me aha. Like the Gene Keys is the feminine approach, whereas HD, human design, is the masculine approach, and they can work so beautifully together. I don't know a lot about human design, but I'm intrigued by it. What I was going to say is that I think that the Gene Keys is I talk about it as being like a labyrinth that you walk, and there's many ways into the labyrinth, right? And it's also a choose your own adventure, which a labyrinth really is. And so when I first got the book, of course, I read my life's work sphere first. And because I have the 25th Gene Key, which is one of the 7 sacred seals. I actually have 3 of the 7 sacred seals in my profile. So my entrance into the labyrinth was telling me to go to the 7 sacred seals pretty quickly. It did take me a while before you can buy these courses through Gene Keys, which is really cool. It's one way of doing it. You don't have to. Interestingly, actually, this is a kind of a beautiful story, is that when my father was passing away in the hospital, I had a trip planned to this beautiful little up island, and my mom said, go, we don't know when he's going to pass. You've already been here. You've said your goodbye. So I went, sort of reluctantly, but it was a family vacation. So I went, and I took my Gene Keys book with me. But the only Gene Key I could read, and I read it twice while I was there, was the 22nd Gene Key, which is grace. And it is what the 7 sacred seals and this involution of spirit is all about. And I sat on the rocks every morning and I read it and I read it. When I got home, I did get to see my father one more time, and it was beautiful. His passing was it was an initiation for me, for sure. And then I looked up his Gene Keys, and his life's work was the 22nd Gene Key. And so I was like, interesting. Now, I had a difficult relationship with my father, but he was teaching me graciousness. And that's the key. That's the gift, is graciousness. He was teaching me to be accountable, and it really connected. So within my cute little family of 3 daughters, we have all 7 of the 7 sacred seals.
Wow.
The bottom 3, my next daughter has the 3 up. My daughter Florence has the 63, so we've got 63 twice, and my daughter Margot has the 22 in her purpose. So I've got all of them. So I was pulled into that teaching. So that's the Gene Keys work that's coming up for me. And right before my birthday's also March 22nd. So like the 22 is always like boom, boom, 22.
It's a really powerful key. Like there are two, for me, there are 2 really powerful keys. It's like 55, because obviously it only has freedom as the gift and as the city. And grace, I think, is like both of those 2. And I think it's, for me, it's that feminine connection, you know, they're like real access points of opening up really what lets grace in, right? Which helps us to feel free, you know, and from there so much flows.
And I feel like, interestingly, Richard Rudd found himself in Victoria, where I live, by accident in 2014. And the story goes that he actually says that the whole Pacific Northwest resonates with the 22nd gene key. And I was like, well, that makes sense to me, 100%. And the beautiful thing is that since I had this core wound, like healing moment, people are now just magically and synchronistically coming into my life. And I feel like I'm on a hero's journey that is connected to opening this seal of grace. And so I feel like my work is in, it's in commitment to grace. It's in service to grace. And it's funny because I grew up as, my dad was an atheist. Like, this is why I was in confusion most of my life, because I'm like, what? Why does all this spiritual stuff happen to me? When my dad says that all that's here is all that's here, like, so funny. But that was part of the wound I had to heal through denial, denying my spiritual self. That was my wound, So.
Yeah. And that, that denial, dishonor, as it's called, but it is denial, effectively, is such a nasty wound.
Yeah.
It's like gritty, nasty.
Yeah, because you don't want to take accountability.
No. And I feel like that and the victimization of 55 go really hand in hand together, because it's that denial helps keep people being victims and keeping the perspective of being a victim. And then you go back to that resignation piece, right, where we don't want to surrender. And like, for me, a lot of the way that I end up speaking is to do with the way I feel energy. I'm not, and like when I'm with clients, I'll often just be like, it has this oosh feeling, and I'll like do a movement, and that's my way of speaking quite a lot of the time now. I've learned that, that lawyer language that I once had is so constrictive. And it's that sense of like the grittiness of denial has this like, it's literally like grit in a wound. And that sense of allowing grace in is like when we surrender and we allow that openness, it's like when we just open and surrender and throw our arms up in the air and we go, whatever, give me whatever, I don't care anymore, and it's that openness that helps us then fall into the flow. And so I love that then it takes you into the synchronicity, right, of people appear and situations happen, right? And are you, as you're seeing all of these synchronicities and lining up of different aspects, how's that emotionally landing? Because obviously you said it's been a few years of emotional journeying, because that's like the second path of the Gene Keys. So there's obviously and it's not in order, there's spirals. So how's that landing, obviously coming into podcast, but within you emotionally, from that emotional journey?
It's interesting because my emotions, it's so funny because I do tarot as well. And for the last 6 months, the 2 cards I pull for myself all the time are the Ace of Cups and the Queen of Cups. Ace of Cups, Queen of Cups, Ace of Cups, Queen of Cups. So it's like there's a new understanding of your emotional, your grail, your emotions, connected, because our emotions are down in our gut, right? And for women, that's where your womb is. That's the grail. And being like really telling me that I was going to come into a place of leadership with my emotions. Like discernment, and being able to use that energy, the emotions, the energy in motion, in a way that's very intuitive and not all over the place, and really much more protective as an empath as well. Like I'm not bleeding, people aren't bleeding into me any longer. I just like, I can see people differently. It's like my intuition has come online in such a different way of being able to see. So it's interesting because when you did my soul realignment, you told me I was a divine truth teller, which could not have resonated more with like, I was like, of course I am. Like,
Of course you are.
being sort of like afraid in my throat chakra to really like say it, because I think when I was a kid, I maybe blurted out some things that did not end up boding so well for me in the end. When I saw things very clearly, I was like, ooh, I didn't have the emotional maturity to know how to deliver the message. But I really feel it. And like everything you told me about the past lives you went through, I was like, makes sense, of course, which was so beautiful. But I actually have a question for you, because you were a lawyer, and interestingly, in my Indigenous studies, I was considering, because I wanted to do a master's degree or a graduate degree, and the Indigenous law program, which is very different than regular law. Indigenous law is quite different. It's very feminine.
Like natural law, right? The natural law, yeah.
Is something like, I went into Indigenous studies being like, I'm just doing it because I know I have to do it. There were dreams, there were synchronicities, there were meeting Indigenous people. I just like, this is the right path, and it has been. But one of the things I was like, I might try to get into the law program. And I don't know if you sense that would be a good direction. Not that I necessarily want to even be a lawyer. I'm like, but I love the idea of strengthening Indigenous law, because I think it'll be very healing.
Yeah, and I can see that being a very natural alignment for you as a place, like especially as we step into our leadership, and we don't have the emotional dysregulation, right, that's happening from our nervous system. You know, when we're still experiencing the stories of our past, our emotions can be a little bit more out of control, and they can kind of knock us about a little bit. And so sometimes we make decisions in that process that don't have that clarity of leadership. You know, they do still come from that victim place, right? Because we haven't quite worked out how we can really stand in leadership and make a courageous decision. And because we don't even necessarily always know what courage is. And so, you know, like you trying to free yourself of those old patterns of emotions, like you don't even necessarily know your emotion patterns, right? You know, and as an empath, we pick up emotional patterns from other people, and we embody them as our own because we feel them. So we feel these patterns that aren't even ours. And so when you're an empath, you also have to not only clear your own emotional baggage, but you're also deciphering, like, is it even my own emotional baggage, or is this just like my dad's story? Right? Because then if it's not, you know, like, yeah, exactly. You know, like when I recognize that I'm carrying someone else's stuff, I'm like, oh, well, it's just not mine. I can drop it. And it's done. Right? And it's gone. And once we're clear, then we can really be in our leadership, right? Because then our truth telling comes without all of that emotional stuff that people feel. And when people, like, I feel the resonance in you is so different from when we first met, where you definitely had a lot more of that fear resonance because the emotions were still kind of trying to, you know, a little bit of that gripping on feeling, I guess, you know, that we were talking about with the resignation. You know, there's that little bit of like, but I still feel like this. And so while you're still in that place, it's hard to really be the spiritual leader that you're here to be. You know, you could be a leader from ego, power, all of that side of stuff. But when you're someone who's sensitive, it's hard to be a leader like that. You know, you have to lead from what's pure and true and the wisdom that you hold in your heart. And so the alignments will come for you about where is a really healthy expression for you. And it could be that knowing that knowledge is something that helps you, especially if you're doing corporate client work. You know, having Indigenous law is the kind of energy we want to be putting into new systems and structures as we rebuild, right? And that's where that knowledge is really applicable. So it's not like I need to become a lawyer. It's just that those laws, it's the way of upholding and respecting our morals and our relationships. One of the most profound teachings I received was from an Indigenous elder here in Australia. And they loved to take me aside and tell me these stories. And I asked at one point, I was like, so, when you're telling me all of these stories, like, what's the real key about all of these different stories? And she said, we're teaching relationship.
Yes.
All natural law is about teaching relationship. It's your relationship of you to yourself, your relationship to the land and the universe, and your relationship to the people that you're with, to the food, to what you need to eat to sustain you, to what you need to have as a home. It's just teaching relationship. And that is what we need to relearn, because as a collective, we have lost ourselves in our emotions. We've become so actually overly emotional by denying, acknowledging emotions. By hiding in rationalization, we lose our ability to regulate our emotional self and to deal with emotions, to set them free. And so we then lose our ability to be in proper relationship with ourselves and with others and with the world. And it's only by healing relationship that we can actually move forward. That's where the Indigenous piece is so relevant to you, but also understanding natural law and bringing that into our systems and structures will help us again with rebuilding relationship with balanced emotion, right? With strong leaders that have a strong heart.
And that's the leadership that's coming, right?
Yeah.
That resonates perfectly, and it is relationality. And I love how, from where you are, that's what the Indigenous people are saying. It's where what they're saying here too. Like this is the connection to Earth, this relationality, this kinship, reciprocity, all of those things, and understanding, because it's all about interconnection. We didn't weave the web of life. We are a strand on the web of life. We are connected to the web of life. And this, like, I get goosebumps just thinking about it, because it really is, and that is part of the shift. And someone gave me a little bit of human design knowledge this week, and he's someone who's a Gene Keys person. He said, this is what's happening shift wise, is that there's this cross of planning that's like leaving us, these old agreements, the structures and the systems that have been in place. And we can see it. Look at what's happening in the States with the protests. Look at, like, the signs are absolutely everywhere that things are disintegrating, and we have to find these islands of sanities, these ideas that we want to anchor in. And I would just share from an Indigenous elder who randomly came into our class, because this is the beautiful thing about Indigenous studies, is sometimes an elder will just walk into your class and give you a piece of information. That his name is Skip Dick, and he's a Songhees elder, and he just came into our class one day and started talking about children and encouragement and courage. So I really linked the words. You said people don't really know what courage is. I linked it also to the word encouragement in French, to encourage. And cœur means heart, right? So courage means of the heart. We're two here, so we're trying to connect, and we're learning from here now. When we have courage, we are from the heart. And it's the same when we are encouraging. We need to be encouraging children. We need to have them in their hearts.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, yeah. I think you might be enjoying some Indigenous law time.
Exactly.
So I'm going to I could ask a really sensible question, like, do you have a tip for the podcasters? But you've already shared so many. I don't even think we need to. So my fun question, which I even ask this of anyone who comes and works with me, I'm like, what is your superpower?
I think I say this in my podcast, is my sensitivity. It's my superpower when I am well. And I have worked really hard on my wellness. And I have, like you said it so beautifully, but it's true that my aura brings people in. I can see people through this divine truth teller. I see them. And because I have trained myself through appreciative inquiry, I look for the good in people, and I can almost tease it out of them. It's like they reflect from me and they want to be their best self. Like when people work with me coaching, it's really that relationship where they see their best self reflected and they bring it out, because I love people. Like, I am a lover. I want to see what I love about you. So I'm always looking for it. And I'm just, that's that open, sensitive, bring you in. I want to love you and hug you. It's your heart. So that's my superpower.
It is so yummy. So yummy. And then the best way for people to find you is on the Empath Suicide Watch podcast. Is that right?
Yeah. Empath Suicide Watch. Also, I have, if you want to take a look at my website, which I think will be morphing as it comes, but right now it's pretty beautiful. I love my logo. It's a bee. I'm obsessed with bees, which is also connected to the Gene Keys, but it's amandabutlercoach.com. So there's a bit more info about appreciative inquiry and some of those tools you said. Like, I'm a trained coach. I have appreciative inquiry. I have emotional intelligence, like all those things that people are like, oh, those grounded tools.
Those ticking box things.
Yeah, exactly. If people wanted to look more into that. And I actually do talk about the Akashic Records a little bit on there too, because they were calling to me, which is why I'm like, oh, I need to get a really good Akashic Records reading. Yeah.
There's nothing like Akashic Records is it's funny, like, you know, when it called you, right? You know, it's a funny process to get pulled into, for sure. And I think I never would have thought I would have ended up doing that kind of work.
I love it. I love your story. It's so good.
How I find myself for some things I do, I'm just like, okay, the universe is just doing its thing, right? Just showing up, and I just have to go, okay.
That's that stream we talked about. That's that. Okay, take me.
Yeah.
And once you get to the point where you trust that the universe actually is a loving presence that will bring you along in the right way. Like, I've had some things that I thought were the worst thing to happen to me. And then I realized I was like, oh, right, because I would have been stuck there for the rest of my life. And it would have been like hitting the dead end of a labyrinth and not knowing which way to go. Right. So
totally. Sometimes, you know, like, it's only our ego, it's our personality that is what makes it so hard. And it has to be hard for us to break through ourselves. You know, I remember when I had my brain injury, the HR woman at my work said, like, looked at me and she just went, you're going to be like this for at least a year. And I was like, no, I'm not. And of course, you know, it was like at least 4 years before I was even vaguely like on a functional, like normal person level, able to try and do a job. And I could not accept that at the original point, you know, and I needed all that time because my personality, my ego was definitely not going to learn that lesson in like 2 months.
Right.
Right? Like, there was a lot of stuff that needed to be broken down before I was going to really get the message.
Yeah.
And that's what we're like.
The universe will keep giving it to you. Like, I've had, same thing, injuries. A shower exploded me. A chair broke under me, broke my tailbone. Like, these things being like, stop putting your energy here. Stop putting your energy here. Yeah. And I'm like, and because in human design, I'm a generator, so I have a lot of energy and I can get a lot done. But I am now seeing, because they always say, and I never got this, when a generator is lit up with something that they love, it's like, you don't get exhausted. You're just going. And I'm like lit up with that energy right now.
Yay! So excited for you. Well, I see only good things coming from you and the things that you've got to share. And I'm so excited seeing you just blossoming. It's so beautiful to feel your vibration and how it's shifted and hear the adventures that you're going on. Thank you so much. And I'll pop in those links so that everyone can come and find your podcast. It is beautiful, guys. It's such a wonderful transmission to let yourself rest in. It's one of those ones that you want to sit down with a drink, like a cup of tea drink, and just let it flow over you and around you and kind of be in your space as you absorb in Amanda's lovely transmissions. So have a listen. It's beautiful. And especially if you're an empath, it will resonate a lot. Thank you so much, Amanda.